Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. I am sending this as a follow-up to the conversations we had on Friday, just to try to get both middle school and high school connected a little bit more, to fill in the gaps for those people that may not have been able to attend because you were being pulled between multiple meetings, and or to just answer some of the questions that might have been brought up and asked. Great conversations with both groups. Definitely a different feel in both groups, but both are on the right track and have amazing thoughts and amazing questions going forward. So middle school and high school, thank you to both of you for your work last week and truly every day. So just a quick recap of some of the stuff that we covered. We started off in both groups by looking at the concept that you see on the screen right here. The idea that Next Gen Science Standards, I know most of you took a look at these over the last couple of years, so just a quick refresher. But the Next Gen Science Standards were actually adopted a couple of years ago here in the state of Michigan. But we're kind of just now getting on board with incorporating them, which is okay. But it does kind of put us behind a little bit, since this is the methodology that's going to be used for assessing our students. Some of the changes with adoption of Next Gen Science Standards really fall into three major areas. One, that the disciplinary concepts are no longer just focused and specific to silos or domains. The life science, earth science, and physical sciences are all incorporated. And I believe on Friday we talked about the idea that biological concepts are impacted by chemistry, which are also impacted by earth science, and there's a cycle that is now recognized and identified. The standards are now also integrated between engineering and science. Put a big highlight on a lot of the stuff that we typically used to just say was STEM related is now truly the standard. And we also talk about the idea that the standards are very cross-curricular now as well. We'll see math concepts and reading concepts and even some historical concepts interwoven within science. The way that the science standards are written is they are really an anchor to all of the other curricular areas. Reading helps support the learning of science. Math helps support the integration of science, so on and so forth. And again, standards as they're written now have a major emphasis on the fact that these are the standards for all children. An important concept that we have to recognize as we move forward K-12. Some of the other questions that were brought up that I'll just try to address really quickly is with this new integrated style of the standards. How does this impact course offerings and teacher certifications? Well, the state of Michigan back in 2014 published a document that allows us to see exactly how we can form our course sequences, and they've got lots of guidance. But one of the important things that I think is important for us to recognize is that districts do have the opportunity to create courses that are not necessarily just in the traditional physics, chemistry, biology, earth science domains, if we see it as in our best interest, as long as we're making sure that graduation credits are being granted through thoughtful placement of high school graduation requirements sequence. So we do have some flexibility if we decide that that's a necessary component of some of our work going forward. We're not necessarily advocating for that now, but I just wanted to address that since it was a question that was brought up. I just wanted to share that with everybody. But one of the things I want to show you quickly is a document that I put together today. Let me slide this over so you can see it a little bit better, because I know one of the questions that was asked, one of our concerns, was looking at that continuum between middle school and high school and making sure that we don't have overlap and redundancies, and making sure that we are truly expanding skill sets as students move through our system. Now, the standards as they're designed now are a little bit different than they were back in the days of the Glicks and the Huskies. I know you've all seen that, so I'm not going to go through that review. But they are written, I would argue, in a more effective way, because we're actually truly able to see this continuum of learning now. Truly K-12, but I'm really going to focus on middle school and high school through our review today. So in this document, just very quickly, what you'll be able to see is I've grouped the standards based off of their themes or the grounding principles as they're identified in the standards document. So for example, PS 1.1, you can see what it looks like in the middle school versus the high school. PS 1.2, you can see what the standard looks like in middle school versus high school. And you'll see that some of them have blanks because there's no grounding standard at the middle school, and you also might see some blanks at the high school because there's no grounding standard at the high school level. But what this allows us to do is it allows us to truly see the progression of the skill. Because, again, these are K-12 standards. Very often, the content was first introduced way back in elementary school or early in middle school before some of these more complex skills are introduced later on in middle school and high school. Remember, these are now 6-8 standards and 9-12 standards. They're not specific to individual grade levels. There's not a 6th grade standard. There's not an 8th grade standard. There's not a 10th grade standard. It's 6-12 for middle school, and it's 9-12 for high school. So we as a school system have flexibility on where we place these standards to make sure that they're most appropriate for our kids. Just a few things for us to consider with this. For the high school standards to be successful, they rely on middle school standards to have been taught and learned to a mastery level. So, for example, at the high school level, if I'm just looking at PS 1-2, students have to construct and revise an explanation for the outcome of a simple chemical reaction, so on and so forth. But in order to do that, students have to first have some understanding of what simple chemical reactions are. If we look back at the middle school level, 1-2, analyze and interpret data on the properties of substances before and after substances interact to determine if a chemical reaction has occurred. So that's now the middle school standard. At the middle school level, they have to have a thorough understanding of how to analyze and interpret data associated with chemical reactions, which means at the high school level, that's not a skill that we have to be addressing because we're going to have confidence that our middle school teachers have taught that to mastery. And at the high school level, students are now going to be able to construct and revise explanations, so on and so forth. You'll see that model really goes all throughout the standards. There's an expectation of mastery at the middle school level that then transcends into a more high-level skill at the high school. There's very rarely an introduction of content at the high school level. So what does this mean? Well, it means quite a few things. We have to be very, very cautious in how we sequence our courses for a few reasons. Number one, I know high school people, you know this, there are some standards like this one that require mathematical representation or mathematical knowledge. It's important that in order for our students to be successful in the science component of this, they're also exposed to mathematical content at the same time that allows for that success to happen. So marrying math and science in a proper sequence is extremely important. It's also important because we want to make sure that there's this endurance of understanding. For example, just a random example, this is not based off of truth, but for example, let's say that PS 2.4 was a standard that was first introduced at the middle school level in 6th grade. And let's say it was something that we introduced in the first semester of 6th grade. So PS 2.4, let's just say, for example, was first semester of 6th grade. And then let's say that PS 2.4 at the high school level wasn't introduced until second semester of junior year. Well, in order for this continuum to truly be in existence and to have any relevance, we would have to make sure that our students learned this material enough that it would stick with them for almost 5 years, because they're not going to see it again until their junior year. So from first semester of 6th grade until second semester of junior year. That's a long time. And we know that often when we teach things to a lower level of recall, where kids are asked to memorize or to summarize information, the recall, the limited understanding, doesn't stick with us. It's through that application, it's the analysis, the higher order thinking that students have more opportunities to actually remember information and to pull it out of the long-term recall in our brains. So we have to make sure that we're actually teaching things to this level, and that we're being conscious of the fact that we probably don't want our kids to have to wait 5 years to be able to bring material back to the forefront of their thinking. So making sure that we have no more than 2 or 3 year gaps from the time that concepts are first introduced until the time that they're culminated at the high school level. So just some things for us to think about. Right now we're not doing work with this, but throughout the course of the spring, I'm going to ask that you just start taking a look at this document. Look at your document and really pay attention to the verbs that are in the document. Again, work I know that you've already taken a look at, but I think it's going to be critical for us to really get into it. The verbs are going to drive our student learning, because the content, again, the content is the content, and it's introduced truly elementary and early middle school. But the verbs are what take it to that next level. We want to make sure that our students are applying, that they're developing, that they're planning, that they're constructing, that they're using. You'll notice that those are the words all throughout: creating, developing, designing, design, plan, use. So it's really a hands-on, integrated approach that we're going to be looking at. So take a look at this. I'll share it with you, and we'll meet again in a little bit. Once you've had some time to process, to think, to troubleshoot, to problem solve, we'll come back together. This will be our grounding work, like we discussed a little bit last week. Our focal point is making sure that we have an alignment of the standards before we start talking about sequencing and resources and things of that nature. But until we have that firm understanding of these concepts, we won't be able to move forward. So just look, talk amongst yourselves, talk amongst your grade level peers. It's great work that we're already doing. I have a feeling we're not going to have to tweak a whole lot because you guys are already in there doing some amazing work. But take a look at it, and again, I look forward to the future conversations. Thanks.